Hi, everybody. Welcome to part 2 of this series on how to use data to drive decisions in talent acquisition. In the first part of this series, we talked a little bit about the dashboard and at a high level, how I obtain that data. Well, today we're going to dig a little bit deeper, and I'm going to show you how to transform that raw data into something that you can measure, record, and ultimately report. So where are you going to get this raw data? Well, most of you are going to pull this data from your ATS or CRM, or maybe even your Excel spreadsheet that you're creating on your own. In the ATS or CRM, most likely you're going to have many preset fields that are already currently being reported on. So I recommend that you export all those fields from that report so that you can determine what fields you want to use in the dashboard. So let's get started, and so we can show you how we can transform all this data into something that you can actually use. All right, we're going to go ahead and start at the talent pipeline. This is something I shared with you in part 1. Is where all your raw data of your candidates are going to be when you are entering them into your CRM or ATS. When you export this information out of your tools, or when you have a spreadsheet that you've created already, you want to make sure that you have a header on the data, so that way it's a description of what is in the column below. You need this because in a pivot table that we're going to be creating, if there is a column without any kind of header on it, then the pivot table will error out and you won't be able to create it. So make sure before you start creating any kind of pivot tables that you have that information across. The second thing, before we go into pivot tables, I want to share with you one of the important things to do is when you're trying to create some consistency in your reporting and so on, is to look at some of the fields that you have and the columns that you have that can be really standardized, and then you can create some drop downs for. So what I have done in this sheet right here is in the job category, I've actually created a drop down. And so in this cell right here, when I enter the information in, you can go ahead and click the selector and pick the profession that this person is in, or the job category that they fall in under. So that way you can really talent your pool under job categories. So how do you create something like this in a drop down? What you're going to do is you're going to have some empty fields above the header of the data talent pipe in the talent pipeline here, and you're going to come up here in the blanks, and you're going to see that I've created a list right here. So how do you get to this point? As you can see, you need to create the list of job categories that you want, or whatever you want to have in that drop down. So for the sake of just showing you how to do that, what you're going to do here is you're going to go ahead and input some information here. I recommend that you start the top of the drop down with select, so that way you as a recruiter remember to select a category for what you want this person to be in, for a job category or whatever state they're in, or whatever you use that drop down for. Then go ahead and add the different categories. So we're going to go ahead and do sales, admin, HR, we'll do nursing, and and marketing. So we have the information in a list now. So what you're going to do is you're going to highlight the top cell in the drop down. And then you're going to go into data, and you're going to see up here in data, there's a tool up here that's called data validation. So you're going to click on data validation, and you're going to come down to where it says allow, and it says any value. What you're going to do is go ahead and click on the down arrow and click on list. Once you click the list, then you're going to go ahead and select the source right down here and put your cursor in the source. And now you're going to go and highlight the list that you want to be in that source there. Once you've done that, you'll see that it put the range of the fields that are going to be covered, and you can click OK. Once you've done that, now you can see that this has created a drop down where you have all those categories in one spot, and so that you have some consistency there. So how do you get that down into your database? You're going to go ahead and copy this cell. You're going to come down into the job category, and you're going to go ahead and click paste. And now you see that the job categories are down here. So how do you get this all the way down to your full talent pipeline worksheet? Is you're going to take to the bottom right-hand corner of this cell, and then you're going to slide it down all the way to the bottom of your talent pipeline. I'm going to go here for just now, And now you can see that you have select, and you can go ahead and select something wherever you want here. So you want to create these drop downs in the fields that, like I said, that you want to have some consistency in the information. Where I have used it on this one is in job category, state, province, country. I've also put it in for where we have the pipeline status, outcome, and recruiter. Now you can add it for any other fields that you have that you'd like to share, and you want to have that consistency. But these are the ones that I have chosen. But you don't feel like you need to limit that or have that many. If you only want to have one or two, that's fine as well. So now that we have the drop downs created here, what you're going to do is you want to go ahead and hide all the fields of where you created the drop downs. So that way it doesn't interfere with your talent pipeline. So you're going to highlight it, you're going to click hide, and now it's hidden. So you have your drop downs, you have your header all the way across. Now what we're going to do is create some pivot tables. What we're going to do here is you're going to go up to the menu bar, you're going to click on insert, and you're going to see that there is a button for pivot table. You're going to click on this, and it's going to ask you for the range of where you want to create the pivot table. You're going to start at the very top, so A59, all the way across to the last column that you have data, and then you're just going to go down a few cells. And with that right there is going to take you from A59 to AE72. Well, that obviously doesn't cover all the data, but so what we're going to do here is go on the end, and we're going to extend that out to 100,000. Now, why 100,000? Because we know you're going to continue to add people to your pipeline. And the larger number that you make that, the less likely you're going to have to adjust it down the road. So you could do 100,000. If you're going to enter a lot of information, you could put 1 million in there. I'm going to stick with 100,000 for right now. With this, you're going to come down here and you're going to see if you want, it's going to ask you if you want to create the pivot table in a new worksheet or an existing one. We want it in a new worksheet. So we're going to click OK. And as you can see, we now have it in a new worksheet, sheet number 2. So we have a pivot table. There's not any information in it. So what we want to do now is start actually creating the pivot tables of data that we're collecting and we want to report on. So the first one we're going to do is on companies. So we want to know how many people we have in our pipeline from various different companies. So we're going to click company. And as you can see, now it lists all the candidates that we have up in the pipeline from these different companies here. We want to we need to be able to put a numerical value next to this so that way we can report on that. Well, what I did and what I recommend that you do is in your document, create a candidate ID column, which I have in column A of our talent pipeline here, as you can see here. In your CRM and ATS, they typically have something like that. So that'll be a good column to use so that you can actually get the data in there, because there will always be something in there. So I'm going to click on this and it will automatically populate into the rows section. We don't want it there because we want to count it as a value. So we're going to come over here and put it in the value column. What that does now is give a numerical value of how many people are in the pipeline for each of these different companies. Now, as you can see, there's a blank field, and we want to remove those because those are not necessarily anything that we're going to be reporting on. And it just, when you do get to the graphical area, if you have that information in there, it's going to show that, and it doesn't necessarily show a very good story when you're sharing that with your stakeholders. So we're going to remove those. What you do here is you click the row labels. It'll drop down over to here. You'll see the list of all the companies that are in your list, and then you're going to uncheck those two that don't have any numerical value. So now you click that. So one of the things that you can do also in pivot tables is be able to filter the information by certain different things. And one of the things that we're going to want to do here, especially if you're an organization with multiple recruiters, is you want to be able to look at this data by recruiter as well. So what you're going to do here is you're going to come over to the pivot table fields. You're going to click on the recruiter, and it's going to put it in the columns, in the rows again. So what you're going to do is you're going to click on recruiter, and you're going to move it up to filters. Now, what that does is it shows you that same raw data here with the number of candidates in the pipeline for all of the recruiters. But now with this filter here, you can come and click this and choose that you want to see what recruiter A has in the pipeline or recruiter B. So this is a nice way to be able to share what you're doing holistically as an organization, but then also be able to report to your recruiters and sourcers and show them what they're doing in their contribution to the pipeline as well. So this is one pivot table. Now we're going to create a second one that kind of shows you the different types of job category. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the talent pipeline. We're going to go to Insert, create a pivot table. We're going to highlight the columns again. Again, where it says 72, we're going to go ahead and put 100,000. This time, we're going to use an existing worksheet, the one that we have the current pivot table in, because we want to keep all the pivot tables in one worksheet, because it'll be easier as you start putting together the graphs and charts. So we're going to go ahead and click Existing Worksheet. We're going to go ahead and find that location, which is on Sheet 2. We're going to go all the way over. We're going to put a new pivot table about 5 columns away from the existing pivot table. And the reason behind that is if you put it right next to it, these pivot tables will expand sometimes the more data you get into it. And if that happens and the pivot tables overlap each other, the data won't actually update, which then you won't ever get the accurate information. So it's good to put a good separation between, like I said, about 5 or 6 columns between the 2 different pivot tables. Now that you've done that, you're going to push OK, and now you have a pivot table. So again, what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and click Job Category. You see all the different job categories here. We're going to click on Candidate ID, because that's going to where we're going to get the value from, and move that over into the value section. And now we want to be able to show this pipeline by recruiter. So again, we're going to go ahead and click on the recruiter. We're going to move that recruiter up to filter. And we have essentially the same pivot table, but we're reporting on different information. This is doing company. This is doing job category. We want to remove those fields that don't have any kind of value, remove them so that you can actually report on, the information that is important and reportable. So there you go. So you have now 2 pivot tables that you can sort by the different job categories and companies and by recruiter. So I'm going to show you one last pivot table that's a little bit more complex, and then we'll move on to the next step. I know you probably all would love to be shown how to create all the pivot tables from the dashboard, but it's very similar to each one of these right here. If you have questions when we get done with the 3-part series and you need help with that, you can always reach out to me. But we're going to show 3 for right now. And the third one we're going to create is actually going to be the quality of candidate submitted to the manager. And what that means is the candidates that have been accepted by the manager that you as a recruiter or sourcer have submitted to them. So let's go forward with that. What I'm going to show you is a different way to create a pivot table. One way that you can actually do this without actually going through the whole process of clicking insert and so on and such like that. If you copy an existing pivot table, you right click it, copy it, and then come over here and paste it 6 columns over, you have a new pivot table. Make sure that when you do this, you actually copy the whole pivot table. Otherwise, it won't paste over the full pivot table that you'll be able to actually use and function and create new information. So with this right here, you have basically the same thing here in the sense of the job categories. But we don't want 2 of the same pivot tables. What we want to do here is be able to look at the number of candidates that we have that have been accepted by a hiring manager. So we're going to get rid of job category. We're going to keep the candidate ID number for the number of candidates that we have. We're going to come down this list here and look for the header that is called pipeline status. So we now have a pivot table that shows you the pipeline status of all candidates and where they all are at. Before we move to the next level, we want to go ahead and remove the blank. And now we have this raw data here. What we want to do, though, is we need to determine what statuses we need to report on for the quality of candidate. Now, those are going to be the statuses that the manager, the hiring manager, has engaged or has reviewed the candidate to say, yes, this person is somebody that I am interested in. And so if a candidate is engaged and they've been submitted to the manager, this could be a possible status that a manager could have accepted a candidate. Obviously hired, hiring manager interview, and that is pretty much it. Those would be the three categories that would be suitable where a manager would say, I accept this candidate as a potential person I would be interested in the future or now for an opportunity. So we're going to click OK. And now, as you can see, this is in the row section. We actually don't want it here because we don't want to see the quality of candidate broken down by the different stages. We want to look at the overall quality of candidate. So we're going to move this up to filter with the recruiter right below it. And now you have two filters with recruiter and status. So with this, we have this many candidates that managers have seen, 2,308. So we now need to look for the status of outcome by manager. So if you click on this, you now have an accepted and rejected with some that need to be selected as a reject or accepted. We're going to remove the select just for this exercise here so that we can focus on the important thing of looking at who has been accepted and who has been rejected. So as you can see right here, we have now the quality of candidate in a numerical value. When we go into the third step, when we go into the next part of this series here in part 3, we'll talk about how we can put that into a percentage, into a graph as well. So now we have 3 pivot tables, and they all can be filtered by recruiter. So we know that we want to be able to look at these individually by recruiter, but we don't want, when we're looking at this on our dashboard, or even when we're looking at it on our pivot tables here, to have to filter it one by recruiter. So there's an easy way of doing this, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So now that you have all 3 pivot tables created, and you can filter individually each one of them by recruiter, we want to be able to combine them all so that you can filter all 3 of them at the same time. And how you're going to do that is utilize the splicer system within the toolbar up here. But before, what we're going to do is you're going to go ahead and click on one of the pivot tables, and then you're going to go into make sure you're on insert, and then you're going to come down to splicer. And what this is going to do is give you the opportunity to really be able to filter information any way you want based on the headers you have. Well, since we are only interested in recruiters right now, we're going to go ahead and click on the recruiter. Once we get done there, we're going to push OK. And now we have our button for recruiters. So we have, if you look here, I can select on this, it is only changing the data on this pivot table, the quality of candidate submitted. So we want to connect this to all 3 pivot tables. So you're going to come up here to the top of the header right next to recruiter. You're going to right click, and then you're going to go ahead and actually look at report connections. Click on this, and you're going to connect all 3 of these. Now we're working on worksheet number 2. So those are the only things we want to connect. So as you can see here in worksheet 2, there are 3 pivot tables. We're going to add those other 2. Click OK. And now all 3 of them are connected. So you can click B and they all change, D and they all change. So this is a great way to really show your story at one time for one recruiter without having to individually filter each of the pivot tables. So when you want to reset and show the whole organization, you click on this filter right here where it says clear filter, and now it shows everything. Now, the last thing that we want to do here is get rid of this blank here. So again, we're going to come up to the top, right click, and we're going to go to slicer settings. When you click on that, you're going to see that it says hide items with no data. We're going to click on that. We're going to push OK, and now that blank went away. So now you have a worksheet with a pivot table with buttons here that you can actually change all the pivot tables at one time so that you can share your recruiter performance on each of these categories right here. So for this session so far, we have been able to look at our talent pipeline. We've added some drop downs so that way we can harmonize and make sure we standardize some of the data that we have in the tool. So that way, when we do create these pivot tables, we have some consistency in how we're reporting. Number two, we've created some pivot tables, and this is where you're going to be organizing your data. So that way you can actually see what you have in your talent pipeline by different categories. You can have it by company, by the job category. You can actually create a pivot table by recruiter too, so that you can show the leaders how each of the recruiters or sources are doing from a talent pipeline status right there. So there's different ways to use this. And so with this right here, it really does give you benefit, and it allows you to really show a full story of what is going on in your organization here. So what I'm going to do is we're going to stop here, and we'll continue tomorrow on part 3 of this series, where we're going to take this data that we have now put in pivot tables and create some graphical charts and pie charts and graphs and so on. And then what I'm going to do is show you an example of how you take that information from your dashboard and create a presentation that you can share with the leaders so that you could tell the story of what this data means to them and means to you as well. So stay tuned, and thank you for watching, and we'll talk tomorrow. Have a great day.